today's session, the topic is mentoring others in NLP. It's a very it's a topic that is broad with that can have like broad interpretation. So I expect the panelists to sort of interpret it in their own ways to sort of like talk about it. But like I'll start the conversation with some sort of like leading questions, and then the panelists can take it from there. I'll also let the panelists introduce themselves. So we have Bonnie Weber, who is a professor at the Institute for Language, Cognition, and Computation at the School of Informatics in University of Edinburgh. We have Niranjan Balasubramanian, associate professor at Department of Computer Science in Stony Brook University. And we have Ashkan Kazemi, who is a final year PhD student at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. So in that order, I'll let Bonnie start. Bonnie, if you could introduce yourself, your research, or what sort of like kind of drives you in this field, but also speak to sort of like what does peer mentorship mean to you, whether how has it helped your career, either as a mentor, or how has it affected your career, either as a mentor or as a mentee, but also if there are like good or bad experiences of mentorship that you have, you're willing to share. And this is the same question. All three of you can get started as you introduce yourself. Bonnie, do you want to take it up, the first one?
Okay, let me introduce myself by saying that I joined the ACL at a time when the number of members was less than you would find in the room of one of the 9 or 10 parallel sessions at regular ACL meetings. So I think our membership at the time was about 150 people. And this is back in 1973. And we had our meetings along with the LSA meetings, the Linguistic Society of America meetings, and we adopted their practices of just having abstracts. So when people say, oh, didn't you have any papers at the conferences? The answer is yes, but it wasn't until 1978 that we decided that we would move beyond the LSA's practice of just publishing abstracts to start publishing full papers. And so my association with ACL goes back many, many, many years. And we, in fact, had trouble trying to have enough members that we could retain the support of the, I think it was IEEE was giving money to different organizations, and we didn't have enough members in order to keep getting the money. So we were always looking for people, which is surprising when the first year of the pandemic, when we had to go virtual, one of the amazing consequences of going virtual was opening up the ACL meetings to people from around the world who had never been able to participate. So when I was general chair for EMNLP 2020, we had people from 18 different time zones and from both the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. So we ended up with, I think it was about 5,000 people. When I started, it was more like 150. So I've seen ACL increase its membership amazing amount. So if you asked about mentoring people in NLP, there was very little mentoring when I started. On the other hand, there was great opportunity because anybody who was willing to do anything could do it without anybody stopping them, because there wasn't the kind of monthly official meetings or all-day meetings of anything. It was just, we could find anybody who was willing to help could help. So mentoring is not really part of my history until I actually was doing mentoring myself. Now, when the title of Mentoring Others in NLP came to me, I started thinking, you know, I wasn't sure what it meant. So let me just tell you what I took it to mean. We did have an ACL session, an ACL mentoring session on finding a great advisor. And there are all these information about how you find a great advisor. And then I thought, well, it's quite different to find a great mentor, because a mentor and an advisor are two different kind of people. And whereas with an advisor, you really need to communicate expectations. When you're finding a great mentor, you're finding somebody who'll listen to you and appreciate what you've done and just try to make suggestions which reinforce or correct directions you're already going in. So a mentor is not supposed to be somebody who tells you what to do, and even may not know very much about your own research. But what they can do is communicate and point you to some general things that you might not have been aware of, like the value of rewriting your paper 10 times, because everybody who reads your papers may come to it with a different mindset. So it's value there. So I started doing mentoring when ACL started having mentoring sessions at the conferences. And I think the only thing that doesn't happen at these mentoring sessions all year round is the students don't get lunch. So that seemed to be a positive aspect of the mentoring program, was that we would sit around a table with 10 people and 2 mentors. And it was most important to the students to get something to eat so the mentors could just talk. So anyway, I know now that we want to take this notion of mentoring others to whatever roles we're in. How do we provide mentoring to people in similar roles, whether they're students or whether they're academic colleagues or work colleagues? So I have had my course correction of the difference, my original impression of what this was to what we're going to discuss at this session. Okay, that's me.
Thanks, Bonnie. I think what you were originally going to talk about is also great to hear from. I think it's all very related, and as we get into the second part of the session, we can sort of branch into new questions. Thanks for that. And next, maybe Niranjan, can you introduce yourself and also speak to sort of what does mentorship mean to you and how it has helped your career, or either as a mentee or mentor?
Yeah, great. First of all, I'm Niranjan Balasubramanian. Thanks for having me on this panel, Vinod, and thanks for doing all the wonderful work you've been doing for the community. Both you, Radha, and Mohit, I think this is a great idea. So I'm happy to be here. So I've been a faculty member in Stony Brook for about 8 years now. So I started thinking about NLP in 2001, which is when I started my master's program in University at Buffalo. There were some wonderful people who were doing cognitive science research and people who were doing information extraction work there. So I got hooked into NLP at that time, and I've been ever since working on information retrieval and NLP-related problems for a while now. And in the last 22 years or so, I have been lucky to be around a great group of people, both my peers, who have offered me a whole lot more than just what education in a strict technical sense might offer. So I've gotten more mentorship on how to be a researcher and how to be in this sort of sometimes what it comes across as a taxing environment, how to survive and how to be, how to enjoy the process and things like that. And I've also been very fortunate to have had great mentors and advisors who've, again, both contributed both on the technical side of how to grow to be a researcher, but also how to be a nice person in the community and to be able to contribute. So I've received quite a bit. And I've also tried in turn, when I interact with others that I consider peers or people who are coming up through the ladder, so to speak, that I've seemed to have climbed up myself. I try to reflect and see what wisdom did I receive at that point, or what support did I receive at that point, and how I could translate that into the current circumstances, right? Because what path we all went through has changed quite a bit. NLP, as Bonnie would probably agree, that NLP has changed what NLP means in the community and the focus. It's expanded and it's grown, but so where we were when we received certain things may be very different now. So I try to think about that. But mostly, I wanted to say two things about mentorship. So I think mentorship is at the end a sort of a supportive act that you expect to give or to receive from someone who's been through the steps, so to speak, right? But that support might look like challenge at some point. So to be a good mentor, I think you need to also be ready to challenge someone's, where they are. You want to be nurturing and supportive, but you also want to challenge them in ways so that they actually can see where they need to be or what needs to be done. So I think that's the hard part for me. Even as an advisor to students, the thing that I struggle with personally is that, like, how do I convey things that need to be changed and to be, to see there is potential for growth, right? It's easy to reinforce or provide just positive support alone, but also identify what areas are weaknesses and how to communicate that effectively. That's the part that I've learned from many people. So when I've received support from people, the things that I remember most are the honest assessments of what I was lacking. That was very, very helpful when I wanted to take the next step. And conveying that can be challenging sometimes. So I'll stop there. It was kind of a ramble, but I hope I gave a sense for what mentorship means to me and how I see it.
Thank you so much, Niranjan. That was really great. So now we have heard from Bonnie and Niranjan, and now we'll go to Ashkan Kazemi, who is a senior PhD student. So we are going to hear from like a different sort of like stage in the career, so to speak. What is mentorship? What has mentorship meant for you? And yeah, please do chat.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Vinod, and also great to be here on this panel. I'm a co-organizer of ACL Mentorship, but today I'm happy to also be a panelist with Bonnie and Niranjan. As Vinod said, I'm a final year PhD student. I work in NLP and computational social science, and my PhD thesis is around using NLP to combat misinformation. So I actually have, as you can tell, a lot less experience than Bonnie and Niranjan, but I guess my experience might also be a little different in the sense that during my time as a PhD student in the past 5 years at University of Michigan, I had the opportunity to work with many undergraduate students who wanted to start in research. And then for me, that has been really a process that was filled with joy, but also learning, because, and I didn't expect this in the beginning, but once I started mentoring undergrad students, to get started in NLP research, I started to also see maybe parts of my communication skills or, helping others improve. And so it has been an opportunity for growth for me as a mentor. I also sometimes help international students, mostly students from the MENA region or I am an Iranian student, so some students from Iran reach out to me, but that's usually with graduate school applications. And so I guess I would interpret mentorship a little bit differently. And for me, it also includes, since I'm trying to, onboard very junior students that might not necessarily have all the knowledge. So there is also some technical work or technical direction alongside the usual support. And I guess, I'm gonna keep this short, and then so that we can get through more questions, and happy to add more later.
Thanks, Ash. I'll also add, like, I mean, even though I'm playing as a moderator, and historically, like, the moderator also sort of like engage in the conversation. So I'm gonna kind of take this opportunity to like sort of like share my sort of take on these questions as well. I mean, a lot of what was already said resonates with me, and especially what, like, Ash, you were saying about thinking of mentoring itself as like a growth opportunity for yourself. Like, I have greatly benefited from that. Like, I think during my PhD years and my postdoc, I have mentored like other PhD students or other junior PhD students or master students or undergrads, and those experience both as a PhD and when I was doing my postdoc. Those experiences, even though some of it was formal in the sense that you hired them as a undergrad researcher. Sometimes it is just like someone wanting to work with you. Regardless, I think those experiences have shaped me as a researcher now. When I deal with like my team, like, when I'm in an industry lab, like I've built a team, and I know that like some of the core aspects of like how I treat one another, like treat the team members, and like has been shaped from my sort of like PhD years of like sort of doing research with more junior researchers. So there's a lot of like learning there, and I'm super happy and fortunate to have had that opportunity. And like I think mentoring also can be like very different things, and depending on who you're dealing with and what the context is. Like, it could be about technical stuff. Like, if someone is coming from a different discipline, and I have been as an interdisciplinary researcher, like, I sometimes have students like who are from social sciences who are not like have had like a CS background. So for them, the mentorship might have been about like sort of getting their bearings in like sort of using collabs or using some of the computational tools, and like it might not be like what usually is considered as mentorship, but like it does add value. But it could be about work-life balance, how to sort of like balance a lot of these things, and interpersonal stuff like communication. It basically depends on like who the mentee is and how what they need and where they are in their stage of career. So yeah, I'll stop there. But like I think also, as mentee or mentors, like not taking yourself too seriously, or thinking of realizing that like we are also bringing just like a one single point of view, and it is shaped by like what we have been exposed to. Or at least I still, even though I've been in the community for like 10 or 12th, 13th year, I guess, I still feel like, I don't know anything. I'm just like running my kind of like sort of show based on what I have been exposed to. And I've been extremely fortunate to have had like really good advisors in terms of like personal connection that I've had with them. So I don't really have a lot of experience to share with someone who is actually having a difficult relationship with their advisor, because I don't know how to navigate that situation. I mean, I may have like some generic kind of feedback, but like, so these kind of things, like I know that like my experience is like it's just like a limiting thing. So yeah, this was a good opener. I want to just point to like all the students who are on the call to actually to feel free to ask questions directly or share on the chat. You can use the chat mechanism here. I'm also monitoring the Slack. I don't see any questions on the Slack, but if that's what you're comfortable with, please share that on Slack or Slido or whatever other platform you're on. I'm monitoring it. But since this is a relatively small group, feel free to raise your hand and ask your question, or just ask your question on chat and I can relay that to the panelists. But I will go back to, so this was great. I'll go back to like Bonnie. I want to hear more about sort of what you were going to talk about, like so that difference between sort of that, yeah, different modes of mentoring, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay, this does allow me to bring up a point which you wouldn't expect to get from a great advisor, but you could get from a great mentor, which is to know when to cut your losses. So your supervisor has an investment in you and in your work, and it's not going to be very likely, and it's not going to be very comfortable for your supervisor to tell you, go do something else. I can't work with you. That would destroy students. But a mentor can work with the student and say, well, maybe this isn't working out, that the difficulties that you're having, you haven't been doing a PhD for that long. There's no reason for you to stick with something that you committed to early, but maybe it was too early to commit to. So I think that a mentor can help you sort of make moves that you wouldn't expect your advisor to be able to tell you, to be able to say to you without making a moral judgment. So mentors, I don't think, make judgments. However much you may challenge somebody as a mentor, and I tend not to be a challenging mentor, but I think it is something that you can do without making judgments of the person, because you're not invested in them. What you are is you want to help them, and you want them to be the best version of themselves they can be. And one thing they need to be able to do is to try to figure out when this isn't working and they should go on to something else. The field is big enough that even if you change what you're doing, you're still involved. So maybe that would be a little elaboration of the sort that you're looking for, Vinod.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. I think as mentors, we have a little bit more leeway in like the kinds of things that we can actually share, and that power differential, that formal power differential is not there, and that kind of like opens up like a lot more, opens up the kind of conversations and kind of things that we can deal with. Yeah, I know I experienced that in like my career as well. Like, you know, I'm, even though I've had like fantastic advisors, like I think sharing some frustrations with like someone who's like not my advisor was like always helpful to sort of like get your bearings. Niranjan or Ash, do you have something to add to that point?
Yeah, so I think it's echoing, you know, Bonnie's point about this difference between an advisor and a mentor. Obviously, you know, there's two differences we've pointed out. One is that, you know, advisor is vested in, because you're working together on something, they're vested in the ideas, they're vested in the direction, and they're vested in you, right? They want to see you, you know, be successful, and to some extent, they reflect in that glory a little bit, right? And you have the other side, which is this power differential that exists also, you know, like you said, you know, it can make things a little bit difficult. I also think if you have a mentor who is somewhat removed from the circumstance, either in terms of research topic or in terms of the university or something else, there are a couple of things that come into play. One is that I think there is obviously a difference in, in training, in how they view things. They may not see the same, they may not attach the same amount of importance to either outcomes in your research or to the kinds of problems you work on research. So there's going to be a diversity in sort of in terms of what the value judgments are on things, right? And this relates to Bonnie's point here too, like be able to say when you can cut your losses, either be in, switching advisors that extreme, or even just nudging towards saying, hey, maybe it's time you looked at something, some other problem, for example, if you've been stuck on something. So I think that diversity has value. And sometimes the personality itself is actually, I mean, I've benefited quite a bit from just being able to connect with some other person who I look up to in some sense, or, whose value judgments I trust because they've been through the process. And it's not the same kind of connection you would have with your advisor because of all the previously mentioned things, right? So connecting with someone that as a personality, as a person who who brings to certain different ways of thinking about things, I think that's very, very valuable. I think that's the one thing I would add to this discussion, I suppose.
Thanks, Niranjan. Completely agree. Ash?
I think Bonnie and Niranjan covered everything, so I agree.
Yeah. Sorry, did you say something?
No, I said I agree.
I think I probably, if I may speak to the point about challenge, I think I mentioned it maybe that again, to me, challenge is not just in terms of, maybe that's not the right word to use, but this sort of, again, it goes back to me in sort of because of the distance and difference in perspective, that interaction gets you to justify or discuss why what you're doing matters, or why the decisions you're now taking matters in some way that's different from how you would do with your advisor, for example, right? So again, that it's a supportive and nurturing environment, but you still will have to do a little bit of work to establish yourself. And I think that process is also very helpful as a mentee for me, like to actually say, to talk to somebody senior in the field and say, oh, I work on problems X, Y, and Z, or I am doing this kind of process in my lab, but then I'm having to justify it or having to explain it that, in somebody whom I trust. I think that helps my thinking a lot of times. And I think that is also helpful.
So I have a question, because this mentoring program has been going on for a while now, this external monthly mentoring. And I'm wondering, the value was going to come in part from the fact that one didn't have to wait for a conference and just see those people who had papers accepted at the conference, and then you would meet them and you could mentor them. You were assigned mentees. What I'm wondering is whether these monthly meetings have led to individual mentoring relationships with students whom you wouldn't normally come into contact with, either students or junior members of the field. So I guess I'm asking both Vinod and Ash whether they're aware that this program has actually brought about some of the desired effects in terms of mentoring.
That's a fantastic question, Bonnie. I don't know if we have set up a way to track that. Ash, please correct me if I'm wrong. We have a pool of mentee or students. I don't want to just assign the label mentee to individuals like eternally, but like we have a pool of students that we usually email, and it would be good to sort of like send a check-in to sort of like how this program has benefited them, and have they kind of resulted in sort of like follow-up conversations with either the panelists or other students who were in the sessions. We have had some sessions which were like closer to like, say, PhD application deadline, like how to like write a Git application package and things like that. And these are things like I feel like a lot more sort of like immediate need things, and there was no avenues for, because conferences are not usually aligned with that. But it would be great to sort of like check in on that. And for me personally, not from this session, I mean this ACL mentorship session initially, but I've had like some experiences where like people reach out to me. I mean, I've had like a mentorship session. I was a mentor, and then someone reaches out to me like after the session following up, and then I've had like met with them and had like 1 or 2 phone conversations, and it didn't, I mean, necessarily develop into like this longer term sort of like mentor-mentee relationship necessarily, but I've had experiences where like it resulted in like something more concrete, like that happens like as follow-up, and I'm hoping that that is happening even in this context. But Ash, please speak to it, like if you have any kind of metrics, any of the experiences that you know about.
Yeah, I would just add that I think we are running some also small group mentoring. So basically maybe pairing a mentor to one or a few individuals that, can get more direct help and more specific help. But I know that Jijing is the person who runs that, and maybe she does keep track of it, but I agree, it would be good to look into it.
Thanks, Ash. I noticed that Soumya Ujjala has a question. Soumya, please.
Yes, so it's not a question, it's more like a comment on what you have been discussing. So I didn't participate in these sessions before, but I follow the Slack channel. And I responded to some of those students who wanted to have their paper reviewed before they submitted, or when they were submitting to an SOP to admission. And we've had those, I mean, I didn't collaborate with them or anything, but we had several rounds of going back and forth where we chatted and I gave some feedback. They do something and then they show it back to me, and some of them got back to me saying they got an interview call somewhere. So, I mean, those things happen offline. Like, I mean, people don't always participate in these Zoom sessions, but something is happening in the Slack channel. I just wanted to say that.
That is
like,
great.
oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Bonnie.
That's also like the student research workshop, which has a pre-submission mentoring. This is sort of on the line that Soumya talked about, where you get assigned to, as a pre-submission mentor, you get assigned papers where the student wants help, just reading over the paper, and if you have general comments, you're not supposed to be doing the kind of editing you would do to make sure that everything is grammatical, but rather that the people are saying what they want to say, and that they've checked all the bases. So I think that's another kind of mentoring program that one sees in the ACL is, or all this, anything that has a student research workshop has now adopted this pre-submission mentoring, which I think is extremely helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's not just student research workshop. I've seen the WINLP, the widening NLP workshop also had that 2 deadlines. One is like for early feedback, as well as like, or at least I've seen that implemented at least 1 year. I don't know if it's like ongoing. There's also that they also had a consideration of like visa, because some of the students would need to apply for visa, so there was like an early deadline so that you know whether you have a paper or not. But I think there was also this feedback process, and I've done it once, like I forget whether it was for a student researcher workshop or for widening NLP, but like I've been like one of those people did that in the formal capacity. But thank you so much, Soumya, for sharing that, like, that such kind of back and forth is happening in the background, even through this mentorship program, because as we said up front, what this forum allows is to sort of open up the access to that sort of feedback mechanism without having already had a paper at like a student researcher workshop or an ACL kind of venue, which is itself is a high bar, right? I mean, like not a lot of people would know that, like, submitting it to the conference is like the way to get into this community and so on. So that's great to hear that, like, conversations happened offline from this events are like kind of helping students that way. I want to sort of follow up with another question about like sort of if, you know, what to do if like mentorship kind of starts to not go as expected. Like sort of if you reach out to someone or as a mentor and like, you know, it could be like a senior PhD student and or if you are a senior PhD student, I'm looking at you, Ash, who wants to sort of like be more helpful to others and like mentor others. And if like you sort of start mentoring someone and if things are not going well, or like if there's not that energy or whatever, like are there like kind of tips on sort of like when things are not going well, like, you know, do you just like disappear or like, you know, what's the kind of like ways to, because there is no kind of formal sort of, you know, relationship. And so what have you sort of like seen, or like what pluses or like tips on what would best practices in that kind of stages? Both Bonnie and Niranjan should like to comment.
You have an order to go? Okay, I'll go.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Niranjan.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I think things don't, I think, I don't know how to put this. We sometimes overestimate sort of how much, you know, how long we should stick with something before we decide value, and also underestimate sort of the overhead that exists in actually, you know, trying multiple sources. So I'm definitely, you know, I struggle with this personally myself. So again, using, you know, Bonnie's earlier phrase, right, that to cut your losses. So if you decide something isn't working out, I think the best thing to do is, again, you know, to reach out and evaluate, to find other people and discuss. And there's always this question of, when it comes to people, you want to know what it is that you could share and what it is that you cannot share, right? So so always having just one source of support is going to be difficult. And, you know, for many people, finding one source of support itself is hard, but it is always, I think, useful to establish contact, introduce yourselves to many people within your environment that is possible. And to remember that I think most people would like to provide some kind of assistance given the time cycles that they have, right? So you see, I mean, the thing that I'm still in awe of people like, you know, Bonnie and yourself, even, you know, just to, you know, the number of things that they do is just unbelievable, but yet they find time to be here and do things, right? So I do think this is, at least the NLP community as a whole, I find it to be refreshing in the sense that you ask people, they take the time to respond to you. You know, it depends, not always, but I think you can find many people who are willing to help. So people want to help. I think we should reach out and be in touch with the community, being a member of the community and staying in touch with as many people, opening up to many people is a good thing. So this way, when, you know, the one person that you're working with, you know, is not working out, at least you can have some other ear who can, you know, take in your situation and give you an assessment. I think this goes for advisors, especially, you know, it's good to have a mentor in that case. And if your mentor is not good, then, you know, you need to find somebody else. So I'm not saying anything profound here, but I'm just saying people would like to help. So being in touch with many people is a good thing. That might help.
Bonnie?
Well,
Thanks.
there's also this idea which you would understand from having a team, and the question is whether this can extend more broadly. So I know when I'm working with a larger group of students at different levels, so postdocs, other members of staff, PhD students, master's students, in a sense, there isn't just one mentor. It's this whole set of mentors at different levels. And so the youngest people have lots of people to ask of, and the middle people have, but everybody has somebody to talk to, both at the same level and up and down. And of course, you have that in teams that are local. And the question, it seems to me, is how do we extend that metaphor to this larger mentoring situation, where you want to say, okay, you're not officially a team, you're not officially all working in something, but we'll form a family, in a sense, for the purpose of everybody growing and see what happens. So it's just something to throw out on two successful models, which is having a large group that you're working with or a team, to say, how can we do this more broadly, since the community is so much more broad now?
Absolutely. Ash, would you like to add something here?
Sure. Since Bonnie and Niranjan already covered maybe the second part of the question, I would just add in regards to, what to do if things aren't going as expected. It could be that you are the mentee in this situation and your mentor, isn't responding, or, things aren't going as you discussed. This is obviously a question that I'm continuously learning about. And I would also like to hear what Bonnie and Niranjan have to say, but I try to not judge people. And that was, again, something that was mentioned, the students, for whatever reason, might be looking for mentors. Sometimes it's a recommendation letter for applying to graduate school. Sometimes it's just having a research experience. And so, and obviously, undergraduate students or master's students, or really anyone who does research, I guess, can get very busy. And so, yeah, I guess I try to maybe, if the collaboration is not going to go well, then I try to end things on a graceful note. And that can be really difficult sometimes. Or if it's maybe right in the beginning of the semester, and I know that the student is looking for a recommendation letter to apply to graduate school this year, then I try to be more proactive. And, if initially I see that this may not work out, I try to communicate that. But yeah, I'm also curious to hear what the other panelists have to say.
Ash, that's a really good point, because I think one of the things about more junior members of staff or students, they don't know that they can ask. So part of your job as a mentor is to say, hey, if you're applying for jobs, if you're applying to school, I'd be happy to write a letter of support for you. So I think this idea of knowing enough of what people's careers are going, how they develop, you can start telling people that they can do things which they maybe never occurred to them that they could ask to do. So I think that's another way that mentors can help in ways that supervisors can't necessarily do, is to tell students, hey, that's okay, I'm happy to do this for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Niranjan?
Yeah, so I had to sort of also add to that. I think it's a great point. So I have this sort of little, not a story, but sort of something that frequently happens when we go out on trips to some other place. So what happens is, we as a family we are a family of 3 people, 2 adults and a child. We go somewhere and we usually take guided tours of some kind, right? And then there will be a guide who's going to, tell us some stuff. If left to themselves, they will tell us some things, and then we'll sort of follow them around, and then the trip will end, right? But both, I'm not very communicative in sort of new situations, but both, my partner and my child, both of them are very, very talkative, and they're very curious, and they ask questions of all kinds. Right? There is, they can generate 1 million questions in an hour. I mean, maybe I'll get into trouble for this, but the point is that they do ask a lot of questions, and then the tour becomes personalized to you, right? So we start learning about things that actually engages and captures. So I would sort of, I would bring that back. But from the point that Bonnie made, it's just that as advisors, we want to, or mentors, we want to encourage whoever we are mentoring to actually ask us all kinds of questions. So I do this in class to say, give me 10 questions before I can move on to the next point, right? So that part I think is so crucial to ask them so that the mentorship becomes more personalized. So I think, as Bonnie rightly said, sometimes they don't even know what to be asking about. So being forthcoming about that is good. And the other side, if you are being mentored by someone, again, asking questions is sort of the primary benefit that you get, and the advice is good, but being able to feel free to ask as many questions as you can, given your setup exists. So
yeah, I think all great points. On this topic, I also want to add like a couple of points, and I think it's in line with most of what you all said. I think it's important to sort of think about mentoring as just like something that happens in this academic community, academic or not academic, but like we are talking about like NLP as an academic community rather right now here. It's not something that's just like, it's not a charity that we are talking about. This is like the way things are done. Like we all successful people here have had such mentoring network, very likely. I mean, Bonnie, I'm not talking about your case because you are building a new community, but because of the kind of community that you and others of that time built, I think NLP community in particular is a very welcoming and very sort of like caring for each other community. Now that I actually sit at like the kind of intersection with other community, I don't want to badmouth any other community, but I have like window into like some other discipline, how they self-organized, and I always feel like I want to have a home in an LP community because it's just such a welcoming and caring community. And like, thanks for building something like that from the get-go. But I mean, it's something that like, mentoring each other, like these kind of informal peer mentors is a thing that has actually sort of like, it happens in all disciplines. And like that, for me, for instance, when I was in the job market after postdoc, like when I was like looking at, like, I had like a few options to choose from. I remember like someone telling me like, all these options sounds good. Can you identify who would be in that department or that particular context, who would be your champion, who's maybe not your manager? Like, identify the people who would, because you're in stepping into a new part of your career, and and you've done whatever you have done like well to actually get these options. But from here on, you need champions who would actually lift you up, like, and like take you forward. And that mentors like in that stage of your career is like super important, regardless of how much hard work you put in. Not saying that like hard work is not important. And I've been extremely lucky and fortunate to have had such kind of champions for my work, or at varying degrees. And so I think mentorship is not something like, we are kind of like asking people to do out of their like magnanimity. It's just like the way sort of like, people become successful. So everybody has sort of like experienced it. And having multiple people, this is some point like I think Bonnie mentioned about like, it's not just a single person, and you don't have to sort of rely on this one single person. And if that doesn't work out, like, you're kind of falling apart. That's not the case. You actually need to have like multiple people mentoring you on like multiple kind of things. And I know that like it's not a privilege for everyone to have like mentors, as in like, you need to sort of like build that network. And I know that like I've been fortunate, and I'm speaking from that place, and it's hard to even find one person. I mean, as an undergrad, I didn't even know what like a scientific paper even meant. Like I was in a small university in south of India, and we didn't have any research staff there, and I was completely clueless, and I didn't have a mentor at that time in this context. So and to point another point about the if things are not working out, and I think communicating, as I think Ash was saying, I think respecting each other's time. And somebody is actually spending their time on you, and if you think that it's not actually really working, it's totally fine to communicate it, and it might be hard, but it's easier to communicate early and like sort of like save each other's time rather than sort of dragging it along for like 6 months because you don't want to say no. I have had experiences even recently, like someone who I just like, when I started as kind of like, oh, having like bi-weekly check-ins, and but then at some point like they're like settled in and they reached out and said like, I don't think we need to actually meet bi-weekly anymore. Like I think I feel like settled. And I felt like so much happy knowing that it was helpful in the beginning, but then going forward, I don't need to actually handhold that person, right? I mean, it's good to sort of like have that conversation, and I was happy for that conversation. Anyways, I'll stop here. We're also only 5 minutes out, so I want to sort of like use this opportunity to sort of like ask Bonnie, Niranjan, and Ash if you have any kind of wrapping up thoughts or points to make.
Well, let me just confirm your idea of having people who are going to be your champions, because I think that's another thing that happens in the field, is that when we meet people and we realize we can give them responsibility, I think that's something that's unique about the field, is that we keep picking people and saying, okay, I'm running this conference. Will you serve this role? Will you serve this role? And giving people responsibility also raises them up, and their people being aware of them in the field. So I think that's this idea of champion comes in is as a responsibility for mentors, and it's one that we do take up. Okay, that's my final word.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Niranjan?
Yeah, so I'll say two quick things. So one is that I think everybody is sort of has had a unique set of experiences that we go through, and there is huge value in communicating that, right? So I would say, if you have an opportunity to mentor someone, if somebody is asking you, or if you see a need that you could actually contribute, I think at least this is sort of coming from my personal space. I felt, what is it that I'm offering to this person that somebody else may not offer, right? And the most thing is that this unique set of experiences I went through, and of course, like you earlier pointed out, that we should put that front and center and say, okay, whatever I'm telling you comes from my own personal experience, but it is exactly that personal experience that I think is very valuable. And so that I think is important. If you're a mentor, sort of bring in your personality and your, what the experiences you go through. And the other thing I would say is that mentorship may not have to take on a formal form. Any interaction you have with, again, going back to our community, I feel like many people want to help and are willing to engage given their time cycle. So any opportunity you get, I think it's easy to you should ask a question, and if that remains an informal sort of setup that you may not even meet regularly, so I think that's okay. So I think mentorship can be had in many different places.
Thanks, Niranjan. Ash?
Yeah, so maybe I would just add from maybe a mentee perspective that at least earlier in my career and as a PhD student, I'm talking about myself, but I know that computer scientists can be very introverted, and you won't reach out, you won't ask. And honestly, I didn't, but also I do have friends who are MBA students or in business school, and I know that their programs are very networking oriented. And from them, this skill or this sentence that was brought up before too, that you can just always reach out, and the worst you can hear back is a no, or not hear back, and that usually doesn't have a cost. And yeah, so reach out to as many people as you can. So sort of reiterating what was already said, but I think that can sometimes be really tough for introverts.
That's a great point. It's also like personal sort of factors affect like how many of these things are viable or not. But because we only have 1 minute left, I will close it down. This was a fantastic conversation, Bonnie, Niranjan, and Ash. And when we started, I wasn't sure, like, where we go with, because the mentorship is such a broad interpretation term. So thanks, Bonnie, for like sort of taking us through and like sort of also putting it out there, like front and center, so that we all can recognize that. But I really enjoyed this conversation and brought back a lot of memories as a mentee and mentor. And yeah, I hope that students who participated here, as well as like who would be watching it on YouTube later, benefit from this conversation. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.